All right, you primitive screwheads, listen up.
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
I ate his liver with some fava beans and a nice Chianti.
Here's Johnny.
Vanity. Definitely my favorite sin.
I am the devil, and I am here to do the devil's work.
The power of Christ compels you.
This is my boomstick.
What's your favorite scary movie?
Good evening, and welcome to Shiver, a horror movie podcast. We are your hosts.
I'm Daniel DeBona.
And I'm David Ulloa, and we are back after a week off where Daniel and I both kind of decided we don't want to end Vampire Month on that note. We were going to do Martin. George Romero vampire movie, the only George Romero vampire movie. And the only thing I can think while I was watching it was thank all the powers that be that this is the only George Romero vampire movie.
Yeah. As interesting as it might have been to listen to us both just absolutely shit on a movie for 60 straight minutes, it would have hurt to do it to a George Romero movie. So we're just gonna let that one go. I made the infinitely better choice of seeing Alien on the big screen for the first time ever.
Yes, you did.
And oh my God, so good. So the movie's already perfect, right? But man, seeing it on the big screen and getting all the sound and the alien breathing behind you, oh, amazing. Loved it.
Yeah, I was very jealous because all I did was sit at home and do nothing, and I was like, okay, well, I guess I'll watch. What did I watch? Maybe it was Brooklyn Nine-Nine. We were talking about Brooklyn Nine-Nine a little bit ago. So we are instead just forging ahead, and we are continuing with the Year of the Monster, and we are going into the month of the Ghost. And this is one that when you first threw out Ghost, I was like, okay, well, we've done a couple of I think the big ghost stories,
right?
And some of the best ghost stories, I think. And I was like, man, I don't know what I would pick. And then you immediately threw out one that I forgot was a ghost story, because I never think of John Carpenter's movies as being like a slasher or being a this or a that. I just think, well, that's John Carpenter. And you were like, well, The Fog. I was like, fuck me, man. Like, this movie is one that I discovered really early on and I absolutely fell in love with. And then you were like, okay, well, I'm between The Fog and this one. I'm like, fuck it. Fog is mine. And you were like, I've never seen it before. So how did you never in a section that we're going to just spitball a little bit about how this movie was, what you thought about it and all that, a section we're calling Spectral Magic. Number one, how have you never seen The Fog before? Right. Because you didn't see the remake either.
No, I did not.
Okay. So in a time that I thought was super saturated with the horror remake, you don't see The Fog, the remake. You don't see how does that happen? And then now watching it now as a full-fledged adult with a horror podcast, what'd you think about it?
So, it's interesting that to think about how I didn't see it, because I go on these kicks where I'm like, I'm going to watch Jamie Lee Curtis, Scream Queen movies. And somehow this one just has never made the cut. It's always been like, oh yeah. And then I'm gonna do The Fog this time. And then I get drunk.
Somehow you always end up watching Terror Train.
And then I get drunk and I watch Terror Train or Prom Night, right? And so it has always been on my list. And so, I was kind of looking through, and I knew what one of my choices was going to be that we're going to do next week. And this was I was like, oh, great. And now I'll finally make myself watch The Fog. And so I have seen it now. And the best thing I can say about this movie, the best way I can kind of sum up how I felt about this movie, was this movie encompasses what made me fall in love with horror movies when I was a kid.
Absolutely.
This movie is 80s horror schlock in the best possible way. It's goofy, it's fun, it's kind of scary. The special effects are hit and miss. I mean, it's all of those things that people our age that love horror look back on, and you're like, yes, this is why I love it. And it absolutely, it scratched that itch on a primal level. Like this, like that lizard brain part of the horror fan of me was just loved this movie. I had so much fun watching it. It just screams 80s. This is, you watch this movie and you understand why there was a moment where people never thought Jamie Lee Curtis would, move on past being a scream queen.
Right.
Because these are the types of movies she was making. It's fun. And it's, like I said, it's not overly scary. The story makes just enough sense.
Mm-hmm.
But it is absolutely what I look for in an 80s horror movie. I loved the idea of it being this ghost story. And I mean, it's classic campfire ghost story, down to the fact that it opens
Yes. Yeah.
with the story being told around a campfire. And it's exactly the way that you would tell a story to somebody. It plays out. I mean, even with the jumps in logic here and there, or just the suddenly it's a day later, all of that stuff. It is very perfectly a campfire ghost story. And I think it was a great way for us to kick off this ghost month, because I really enjoyed it. And I think that when people think of a ghost story movie, there's a lot of times you go, oh, wait, what about this one? It's like, well, at this point in the movie, they say it's a demon. It's like, no, in this one, no doubt about the fact it is not a monster.
Yeah.
It is not a demon. It is not a cryptid. This is just ghosts and a ghost story. And it was fun.
You have hit the nail on the head, I think. And I was concerned when I found out that you hadn't seen this before, because I was concerned that there was a nostalgia to this that Neri once, friend of the show, said I had never as a child seen the Never-Ending Story. Somehow I went my entire childhood without watching this. I didn't see it till I was like 28 or something like that. And if you ask that question, how did you never see it? I don't have a fucking answer for you. I don't know. My childhood sucked or something. I don't know. So he told me, he was like, you missed out, because there's no chance that you're going to appreciate this movie now the way that you should, because it was made for you at your time and you missed it.
Right.
And I was like, man, that's a really good point, because I've heard people say that of like The Goonies, something that I did see, not when it came out. It's slightly before my time, but something I watched incessantly as a child. And I was able to watch The Never-Ending Story and appreciate it on that lizard brain that you talk about, where it's like on a primal level, this hits all the things that you want it to. I'm so glad that you feel that way about this movie, because that's how I feel about this movie. Because I want to say this right now, because I'm going to spend the next hour and 15 minutes absolutely coming all over this movie, right? This is not a perfect movie.
No.
It's not by any stretch of the imagination. There are flaws here. Some of them have to do with budget. This movie was made for less than $1 million.
Yeah.
To me, that's like insane. This movie was made like months apart from Raiders of the Lost Ark. And I'll always go back to that, because somehow I always remember how much money Steven Spielberg spent on Raiders of the Lost Ark. And Raiders of the Lost Ark, filmed in 1980, when this movie was released, was filmed for $20 million. And that was not seen as an extraordinary budget in 1981. So for this movie to be made for $900,000, the budget didn't bloat to $1 million until they did reshoots.
Right.
Wow. The fact that we get the movie that we get for less than $1 million That's absolutely insane. Absolutely insane to me. And I think that we could still make this movie today. Not that it needs to be remade, and I know it was in 2005, but I'm not talking about that fucking movie. All right. You could probably make this movie again today for under $1 million, and it would still be great because this movie is not about the special effects, even though John Carpenter is kind of known for having killer special effects in his movies. There's very little gore in this movie. There's very little in the way of physical horror.
Right.
It's all atmosphere, because you hit the nail on the head. It's a ghost story, and it opens up with a campfire with Mr. Macon just scaring the shit out of little kids. And I will, until the day I die, the older I get, the more I want to scare the shit out of little kids around a campfire. Just the other day, I was DMing a Dungeons and Dragons game for my son. He's just going to be 10 years old in a couple of weeks. And it was for him, one of his best friends, that kid's younger brother, and the dad. And I'm like going all off. I'm like, there's zombies, and I'm getting like really into like describing how they're pulling the guts out and like eating the guts. And these kids, I didn't realize I was going hard on the story until I looked up at their faces, and they look like this. Like, oh, sorry guys, but you know what? Kids need to be fucking scared.
Yeah.
All right. Because life is not always daisies and fucking water pistols. Sometimes it's Guns N' Roses. All right.
Yeah. No. I think you're right in the fact that it is. The scares here are from just enjoying the movie. Like they build into everything they do. I mean, down to the fact that the timing. Like, yes, I know it's a movie and it's written this way, but I love the idea that he tells this story, and just the second he finishes, dong, right? They hear that clock chart. He's like, it's midnight. It's April 25th now. You know, like that whole thing. I was like, fuck, this guy is so good. Like, how many times have you done this that you know the exact second you have to start? How many children have been scared because the second you finish telling this story, that clock chimed? I loved it.
Fuckers had at least 100 years to tell the story.
Right. It was, I really enjoy that. Also, just before I forget to mention it, you mentioned the Never-Ending Story. I'm going to take a quick sidebar here. Keep an eye on the Shiver channel in the near future, because a friend of the show and I, Hunger, are currently working on a side project that actually came from the idea of how did you go this long in your life without seeing the Never-Ending Story. So keep an eye on the Shiver channel, because we're going to start releasing episodes there soon. It's called After All These Years. So, and that's the whole premise of the podcast, is how did we go this long without seeing a movie like the Never-Ending Story, which it was just very recently revealed to me that Michael Hunger had never seen. So
wow, keep an eye. Who would be perfect for that is Missy.
Oh, really?
If you're a longtime listener of Shiver, you'll know her from the Geekmore podcast days. There's a whole like, I don't know how there's movies that she hasn't seen, and like Never-Ending Story. And she's like, well, my childhood sucked. I'm like, you can only use that so many times. I think some of this is on you now.
Yeah, so keep an eye out for that. But back to this, as we're talking about it being, this wonderful ghost story. I mean, let's get into the actual story. So in a section that we're calling There Be Gold in Them Deborah Hills, Dave, take us through this story. Yeah, it's good. Take us through the fog, the story. What happens? What do you think about it?
Well, look, the story, I think, is somewhat timeless. And I was watching this for the first time in maybe 3 or 4 years, and thinking like, man, this story is more relevant today than I think it was in 1980. And it's because this really is the story of America. It's right. And it's not meant to be that deep, I don't think. But Carpenter is like that, where like there's a little bit of social commentary there, and he's like, yeah, it'd be nice if we kind of, commented on this thing. But really what he wants to do is he wants to thrill you for an hour and a half. And he always succeeds at that. Whether the movie is good or bad, he always succeeds at entertaining you for an hour and a half.
Vampires.
Yes, that. Oh my God, yes, 100% yes. Fuck, you might not have gone to Alien if we had done vampires instead of Martin. So, this story is about how like a group of people were robbed of something, and there was an injustice that occurred, so that what we know as American tradition and American society could thrive.
Right.
And really, I mean, that's at the core of so much of what goes on in hot button, issue conversations these days. Issues of like, systemic violence and racism institutionalized in this country. That's really, I think, the dividing line between, like, more than anything else, like that's what determines how you're voting, I think, in this country these days.
Yeah.
Is like, does someone acknowledge these things that I know to be true, or is someone talking about something that I think is nonsense? That's it. That's America in a nutshell, I think. Yep. And this movie really gets at the core of that, because Father, is it Patrick?
Malone.
Father
Robert
Malone.
Malone.
Father Malone. Patrick Malone was his grandfather. Father Malone discovers the journal of his grandfather, who was the reverend in this tiny little colony at this time, and in his time, in his own contemporary time, that shows that, hey, we did some unspeakable things and we all benefited from it. And I feel terrible about it, but what are you gonna do?
Right, but
here we are. Yeah. And then what I love about this movie is how different characters respond to this, because Father Malone responds by being totally racked with guilt and not being able to get past it. And I think that there is a real big subset of people in this country who feel that way, who feel like, I have to atone for the sins of the father. Right. And then you have an entirely different group of people, played, I think, masterfully by Jamie Lee Curtis's mom. All right. She is like, well, what the fuck am I supposed to do about this? Like, that was 100 years ago. Right. And so you have Hal Holbrook, who, again, masterfully plays Father Malone, who we talked about, I think, a lot when we did Creepshow, because he's just one of these guys for, like, when I see him on screen, I'm like, fucking that guy, he's here. Fantastic. I know I'm going to have a good time. Like, these are like, this is the dichotomy of American society, where it's like, what am I supposed to do with this information? Meanwhile, you have the group of people that are trying to just seek justice. And that's the ghosts. And the really interesting thing is that the ghosts are not the bad guys in this movie.
Right.
However, a bunch of people who are not responsible are paying the price. But how you decide to handle the knowledge of the sins of your fathers determines how you end up. And sometimes it's not always the way you think it might be, which I think is really, really interesting, because some people are willing to sacrifice themselves for the sins of the father. And guess what? You will be cold. But then also, I want to just ignore what happened because I want to, like, just get on with my life. You might get off. And I think that is reality. Reality is not always that, hey, the people who should be paying the price today are going to pay the price. Doesn't always happen that way. It's very rare, I think, that we get like a Derek Chauvin, who's like, hey, you know what? He did fucking something wrong, and he brought a lot of attention to something, and he's paying the price. Very rare that something like that happens.
Yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right in the fact that the ghosts are not the bad guys in this. They're almost spirits of justice, right? They've waited their 100 years, and now they're coming for their pound of flesh. They want what's theirs, and there's nothing wrong with that, especially when for 100 years this town has profited off of their loss. And this seems to be a very successful little small town. They got their own little radio station. They're having their centennial celebration, and
it's idyllic.
Exactly. Exactly. And so, I love that idea. And I mean, if you need to really kind of envision, if you're listening to us right now and you're like, well, I don't know if this sounds like classic ghost story, watch this and tell me that you don't get Pirates of the Caribbean vibes.
100%.
Because that's what it is. You stole from somebody, you fucked up, you're cursed now, you're trying to get it back, right? And so it's got those same things, because that's one of the things that makes a good ghost story, is this idea that the ghost isn't necessarily an evil entity. That's one of the things that separates a ghost from a demon. A ghost can be vengeful, usually for a decent reason. A ghost can be caught in some sort of loop, but they're not evil by nature. Ghosts may end up doing things that suck, like killing you or killing people, but most of the time there's a pretty small through line between what the ghost did and why they did it, and it's usually not any sort of gymnastics to figure out one to the other.
No, and typically justified.
Exactly. And so I love that element of this shines through. I love that it would be harder to argue that the ghosts are bad guys. Like I said, we're not going to have to sit here and make any sort of profound argument and create any sort of head canon that we hope people buy into, to make people realize that the ghosts are just, they're there, and they're there for a reason. So I love all of that. I love that this idea of it's been 100 years. This isn't something that just happened a year ago and now they're coming. No. They let you sit in it and marinate, like you said, and then they came for justice. And I love the idea that you're never safe from justice, from something that you've done that's that wrong. It's one of the reasons that I absolutely just get off to finding out that somebody like the East Area Rapist, right? The original Night Stalker. Dude got caught because some distant relative did a 23andMe. And then he got caught years after he'd been dormant. I fucking love the idea that these people now have to sit and sweat every day of their life. It doesn't matter if they haven't committed a crime for 20 years and they're now, living a completely different life. Now that this genealogical technology has come so far, they're starting to sweat again.
Yeah.
Right. It's, or, like the end of Inglorious Bastards, when he's like, you're going to take off that uniform and then you're just going to live some life. But I like people knowing who my Nazis are, so he carves it in his forehead. The guy, he never got to just go live a life. I love that. So I love that they've had 100 years to completely forget about this as the birth of their town. Yeah. And now, does it suck that it's people that have no idea what's going on? Yeah, sure. But like you said, sins of the father, right? These things happen. I love that element of a ghost story. I love it being, it's not this time last year. No. That's not a ghost story. A ghost story is something that's had a century to marinate. And I thought that was incredible. I love the way that as this movie plays out, the presence of the ghosts is felt a lot more than just when they're physically there. As soon as that clock strikes and we hit 100 years, there's this paranormal wave that just sweeps through the town, and it's shattering glass and activating car alarms and all of these things, little tremors, and the car that just goes up on the lift. Just the idea that their vengeance and their need for it is so powerful that before they've even made it, before the fog's even rolled over the water and into the town, you're already dealing with the consequences of what started this town. I thought that was really, really good. And man, all of this amazing story topped off by just that perfect 80s, /70s John Carpenter theremin electronica,
it really is fantastic.
Score. It's so good. And as soon as like that first note hits on it, you're like, yep, That's John Carpenter. Like I feel it in my bones.
Yeah.
That I know it was one of those things where it's like, I know this song. I've never seen this movie, but I know this tune.
Mhm.
Because it just feels like John Carpenter music.
Yeah.
And so all of that for that perfect window of a schlocky horror movie at 90 minutes, right? Get in, tell your story, get your kills, wrap it all up, get out. So perfect. And then on top of all of that, you finally think that it's all said and done.
What a great ending.
But no. Father Malone does not get out untouched. He still has to pay, because we know for a fact that he's a direct descendant of the people 100 years ago who did these things. And even after the ghosts have been appeased and they've gotten back their gold, which, by the way, the symbolism of stealing the gold from these people, creating this town and this culture around all of it, melting it down into a crucifix that then Father Malone is struggling to carry to try to pay for the weight, pay for the sins of his town, as he's like waddling, trying to carry the. Oh God, so good. And then he's still struck down. They still got their 6. They still got their entire pound of flesh.
That's the thing that for me really works about the story, is because yes, there was gold that was stolen from them, but Father Malone, even though he seems to be a fairly good priest, right,
and a good Catholic with his wine,
right, but like he never gives us any indication that like he doesn't care for his flock,
right?
I think that priests and men of the cloth, they're very easy targets for people to just write them into situations where it's like, oh yeah, well that's the priest. They didn't do that here, and I think it's because it was low-hanging fruit.
Yeah.
And Carpenter didn't go that route. He made him like the one guy who's like really concerned with the moral implications of what all this means for everyone. So I think he actually is concerned about saving people's souls. But I think that even more than anything comes to show that at the end of it, what he thinks is going to save them is giving the gold back, because man ultimately is most concerned with his pocketbook.
Right.
When really the only message that Captain Blake has sent is that we're going to get like for like. You took 6 lives. We're going to take 6. And so I believe that he had every thought that he was just going to use whatever spectral magic he had to heat up that giant crucifix of gold until it melted Father Malone. And when that didn't happen, he was like, okay, we got to regroup and think about what we're going to do now.
Right.
And we'll just come back later. And he had already just targeted him like, you're the guy. You're the one.
Yeah. It was... I thought that everything they did with that was, like I said, like you said, is this a perfect movie? No. But was that ending from the point that he drags the cross out there to the fact that he becomes victim number 6, that moment in time was perfectly done. Like the Father Malone storyline here, I think, was spectacular, down to the fact that he was so pious and regretful about all of it that he stopped reading before he got to the key element of the thing, right? He's like, I had to stop reading at that point. It's like, man, 2 more pages. Tom Atkins found it pretty quickly.
But of course he would, and he didn't even have a mustache in this one. So clearly not the mustache that gives him the powers.
Right. And so I thought that there were so many things done well here, down to the fact that, like you said at the top, the fear here, the scariness of this movie doesn't come from when the ghosts get there, we're going to see a throat ripped open and the blood spurt. It's just the fact that they're conniving little sons of bitches, right?
Yeah.
Like they, like they're it's and I know we're going to talk more about ghosts later, but it's an interesting thing because they're not ethereal. Like they're very material.
Yeah.
They move within this fog that rolls into the town, but they're holding very real weapons that other people can pick up. They're knocking on doors and breaking windows. Like these ghosts are there. They exist on our plane. And so I thought there was a really good combination there of them having these mystical powers, this spectral magic of heating up the cross and rolling in with the fog, while also being like, I had that moment where I was like, is this going to come down to a if it bleeds we can kill it like type thing, right? Like,
Yeah. How do you stop it?
Yeah, exactly. Like nobody's put around a buckshot into one of these yet, but it definitely seems like it might slow one of them down.
And you used a word that I think describes this perfectly, and I think describes a lot of Carpenter's work pretty perfectly, which is schlock.
Yeah.
And that typically is a word, if you're not familiar with schlock, or you've heard it and you've got really like not much idea of what it means. This is a word that came about in the 50s to describe movies that were kind of nonsense.
Right.
And that, I think, is the inspiration for much of Carpenter's work. And this movie, really, if you stop and think about it, like, this is a 50s horror movie.
Yeah, no, absolutely. This thing screams older than 80s.
Yeah, it really does. And when you stop and think about it, it's like, geez, like there's barely any gore. Like I'm not even certain of the rating of this thing. Like, is it rated R? It is rated R. Okay, I couldn't tell you why it's rated R.
Because you got to see half of Jamie Lee Curtis's titty.
Doesn't
seem worth an R rating.
Doesn't seem worth an R rating. Not the titty, because that does. Still today, if Jamie Lee Curtis decided to get topless, I don't care what she's in, I'd go watch it. She is
next Activia commercial. Topless Jamie Lee, here for it.
One of my first loves, and will certainly be one of my last loves. So I can't think of why, because there are movies that I think existed before the rating system that this reminds me of.
Right.
And I think that that's always where Carpenter goes to, because, him being a young guy in the 50s and 60s and going to drive-ins and watching these kinds of movies, that's the kind of movies he ended up making. And that's exactly what this is. Is it as scary as something like Halloween? No, I think Halloween is genuinely scary in a lot of places. And I think that this has scary elements to it, but it's, I think, much more than anything else, it's just schlocky fun. Yeah. And I do think that there's a certain kind of person that appreciates this. I think that there's a lot of kinds of people that appreciate this. And I think that there's people who don't. So if you go to a horror movie to watch something like Hostel, you're not going to enjoy this. But I think for literally any other kind of person, you're going to watch this and you're going to say, man, this was a lot of fun. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah. And so one of the biggest reasons that this movie is a lot of fun is we've dropped a lot of names here because this cast is great. So in this section, we're called Anthony Owens. Go take us through some of the folks in this movie, man, because this is a pretty solid ass cast of people where it's like, oh, it's that guy. Oh, it's that chick. You do that a lot in this movie. And then you start remembering all the other things. So, I mean, who you got here?
Listen, there's a lot of people, like literally I could talk about every character in this movie, including John Carpenter, because John Carpenter is like the first person you see in this movie. He pulled a, a Hitchcock. Right. The first person I'm going to talk about, though, is Janet Leigh as Mayor Williams. Is it Mayor? I think she is Mayor.
Or was she
councilwoman?
Councilwoman, yes.
Yes, Councilwoman Williams. Listen, she is the very first Scream Queen. And when that title is like passed on over to her daughter, Jamie Lee, it's like, it's perfect. It's like this full circle moment where it's like she was in Psycho and she, helped define a genre, because I know that Psycho isn't really a slasher, but it certainly is a proto slasher.
Right.
And in a lot of ways, it fits that proto slasher mold perfectly, because there's so much in there that is a slasher, and she is perfect in that movie. But as far as like horror, that's kind of it until you get to The Fog. And then she comes in and she plays this straight. She plays it like, I am a politician and I am here to run this town. I love the moment where it's like she knows her husband's dead, that he's been killed by ghost. And she's like, what I have to do is not grieve. What I have to do is go out there and I have to be the strong woman that this town needs. It's like, you fucking go, girl. Like that's it, it's cheesy in the right kind of way. Like Ralph said in I can't remember which episode it was, Return of the Living Dead, the eau de fromage.
Yeah.
That's it's that cheese stank that we love. It's the reason why we bake our brie. Right.
Yes.
And we don't just eat it cold, although cold is good too. That's what she brings to this. And it's also something that she brings to this is a little bit of like authority, because that's something that like Carpenter was I don't know that Carpenter was young when he did this, because I feel like I've seen images of Carpenter in the 70s and the 80s, and he always looked like an old man.
Yeah, sure.
And how he landed Deborah Hill, I'll never know. But or not Deborah Hill, Adrienne Barbeau. Thank you. How he landed Adrienne Barbeau, which I'm sure we're going to talk about, I'll never know. But like he was not an established director at this point. Like he had like no one had seen his first movie.
Right.
No, and still to this day, I think there's lots of people that haven't seen it. But there's a lot of people who had seen Assault on Precinct 13. There's a lot of people that had seen Halloween. So like he had started to get some buzz, but he wasn't John Carpenter yet. So like having Janet Leigh come on, who's like a bona fide actress, like that lends some credence to your production. And that's what I think she brings to this, is like that old school Hollywood where it's like, I guess we're making a picture here, huh? And it is fantastic. She plays that role so perfectly. It's great. There's not very many scenes where she interacts with Jamie Lee, but what an amazing thing to be able to be like immortalized on screen with your mother. Like that's got to be an amazing thing. That is for sure my first pick. Who are you going with first?
I'm going to go to we mentioned it just a second ago, Adrienne Barbeau, man.
Mm-hmm.
Oh man. So like all I really knew about this movie was it was John Carpenter and had Jamie Lee Curtis in it. So it starts, and I was like, oh holy shit, it's Adrienne Barbeau. Right. And I was just like, yes. I love Escape from New York.
Oh yeah,
I love Swamp Thing. We've done Creep Show on here, right? Just she's done so many things that I love, and just gorgeous. And man, but not only does she come on, but then she comes on with that silky radio DJ voice, man.
Oh God, it's so good.
And it was so right off the bat, I'm like, yes, this is incredible. I love it. And then when they get into it, and she basically is playing this role of like operator, where she's using the fact that she's in this radio station to broadcast information and try to keep people safe. And, she's sending secret messages to her boyfriend, Dan O'Bannon, the weatherman, right? And she's, she's sending messages to him, talking on the radio, and she's just doing all those, classic DJ things. But once they're in the shit and she's using the radio to directly send messages to Tom Atkins, and she's running the show from a lighthouse because she can see where the fog is. I loved that as a character, this idea of the person who's not in it right away. She ends up having to deal with her own stuff, but she's not physically in it with everyone, but she's 100% in it as everybody else situationally. And I think that she played that really well. I loved the shift from calm play calling at the microphone to the frantic, panicked, damsel in distress trying to get away, climbing up on top of the lighthouse, making all those classic horror movie mistakes. Like, where were you going to go next? And so, but she did all of that so well while just always being gorgeous, man. That's the thing, when you look at a horror movie, there are so many times where we're like, man, she's gorgeous. I wish her character had been worthwhile,
Right.
Like,
that does happen a lot.
Yeah. And it's like she was given a very important role while also being a smoke show. And like I said, man, that voice, like if I lived near there, I don't even like jazz, but I'd listen to that station every night. I gave the new Andre 3000 album a chance. It's not for me. I'm glad he's doing his thing. Not really my thing. I'm not a jazz guy. But yes, I would absolutely listen to the radio station because apparently she came on after every song.
Right.
She definitely did a lot of talking on that radio station, but for a character who spent most of the time physically out of the way of the danger, she never felt like she was just tacked on to be another pretty face in the movie. She felt like she was every bit as important as everybody else. Plus, I think that she got what was the scariest scene in the movie, which is when the piece of driftwood starts to leak water and it leaks all over everything.
What an awesome scene.
Oh my, like that scene gave me chills. When we talk about how scary this movie is, that scene was unnerving. Like that's the type of stuff you look for in a ghost movie. The sections where the ghosts are just fucking with you. Like they're not here to kill you right now, but they want you to know that they're not far away. That scene was so good, and she played it so perfectly out and grabbed the fire extinguisher and everything. I just thought that she did an amazing job.
Yeah, I'm glad that I was split on whether to talk about Janet Leigh or Adrienne Barbeau first because like you, I've been in love with Adrienne Barbeau since I did see Escape from New York before I saw this as a kid, and I was like, who the fuck is that? Because
and if you think she's sexy in this, you've never seen Escape from New York, go watch Escape from New York.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And that she's another one who together with Hal Holbrook was in Creepshow.
Yep.
Actually with Hal Holbrook in that segment of Creepshow, The Crate. So okay, so who am I going to talk about? All right. Okay, so I guess since I spoke about Janet Leigh, I'll move on to Jamie Lee Curtis. I read today that she was given this role, like she didn't even need to audition. She was given this role by Carpenter because he felt badly that she had not been able to find a career after Halloween.
Okay.
And he was like, I got to set you up. Like, I seem to have fucked you over. Because that's what happened is, Halloween became this huge success. All these movies are being made in the same vein as Halloween, and she's not finding the work.
Right. She's only Laurie Strode now.
She's only Laurie Strode. So he's like, all right, well, I'm gonna put you in this thing, and I'm gonna give you a totally different kind of character. Right. So like within moments of her being introduced, she's fucking Tom Atkins, which is like radically different from Laurie Strode. And it's like, okay, I see what you did there. Fantastic. And wow, she plays this totally different from Laurie Strode. And I think a lot of the characters that she played early on in her career are more in the vein of Laurie Strode, because there's something about Jamie Lee Curtis, especially young Jamie Lee Curtis. There's like an innocence there.
Yeah.
I don't know why it is, because there's nothing implicitly innocent looking about her. But I guess it's just she's a good actress, and the roles were written to be innocent, and so that's the way she played it. But she doesn't play this role in that way.
No.
She plays it totally different. She's just and you never really know about her. You never really know what, like, is she running from something?
Right.
You know, it's like, and she's like, I brought these ghosts here. So like maybe she has this guilty conscience, like she's running from something she did, and she thinks that people are after her. I would love to find out what her story is, like Elizabeth's story. What is her story? Because I was thoroughly engaged the entire time, but there's also a softness to her. That scene in the morgue,
Yeah.
where like she's kind of just like feeling so defeated, and this dead body rises and like comes towards her. Like, she is officially or unofficially, I don't give a fuck. You can agree or disagree, but you're wrong if you disagree. She is the first Scream Queen.
She's the Scream Queen.
She is the Scream Queen. And like that scream is iconic.
Yep.
It's iconic. She does it as Laurie Strode. She does it here as Elizabeth. And like she really does set up what every other Scream Queen needs to be. You need to be pretty, but you need to be smart. You need to be fast, but you need to be slow enough where I feel like they might get you. There's this like delicate balance between like strength and fragility that she's able to portray. And I think like there's very few Scream Queens that I can think of that come close to this at all.
Yeah, like I love you're talking about how she played all these roles where she was, she was so innocent. And so I love how they played on that as well. So he picks her up, she's, "Oh, I've never hitchhiked before. Are you weird?" And it's like, "Okay, here it comes," right? She's going to be another babe in the woods. And Tom Atkins is like, "I mean, yeah, I'm a little weird." She's like, "Oh, thank God." Like the last guy was not weird at all. And so boring. And it's like, "Oh, okay, shit." And it's like, "You want some beer?"
Yeah.
"Yes, I'll drink that beer you've been swinging on." It's like, "Okay." And then it's like, "Oh, and now we're banging." Right? Like, and it was just like it was 0 to 100. And it absolutely was completely different from the things she'd done. But to give us that introduction to her, like we were going to get that same innocent character, was flawlessly executed. That was so much fun. And you're right, man. It's that scream. It's that scream.
Mm-hmm.
And it was perfect. It was perfect in the morgue. And then he runs in, and she curls up and she buries herself in his chest. And you get that moment where it's like, huh, what happened to the badass chick that was, drinking beer in a stranger's truck and having sex before you knew each other's names, right? And it's like,
what a great moment. When he's like, "What's your name?" I'm like, holy fuck. Like Tom Atkins, man, like only he could fucking like him and Harrison Ford, like the only dudes that can get away with that shit.
Right. And so she, they played on that aspect of her being able to do that, and did really showcase that she could be more than that. And so I thought that I loved that about her. It was interesting because, it's on our Instagram, when I advertise this and I put up the poster for it, she's the face on the poster.
Mm-hmm.
She's who you're seeing, but she probably had fewer lines than just about anybody else in this. She was there, and she played her part, well enough. I'm not saying she did a bad job. I think I was intrigued by the fact that I got the amount of Jamie Lee Curtis that I got, because I was expecting more, right? I was looking for final girl Jamie Lee Curtis. And I didn't get that. And that's not a shot at the movie. That's absolutely nothing. There's nothing wrong with that. and she's just, that's who she is in my head, because like you said, after Halloween and it explodes, she was just always Laurie Strode. And when I think of Jamie Lee Curtis, I immediately jump to two movies. I jump to Halloween and I jump to True Lies. And there's a lot in between there. And I know that, but those are still the first two places that I go. And what I got of her here in a supporting role, I thought she did a great job.
Yeah. And you no, I had a brain for it. Never mind.
Okay. Well, in that case,
wait, no, I remember. Sorry.
Get it.
You make a really good point about like having an expectation about what the role she's going to play or the role she's going to fill here, as in like the final girl. And this movie in a lot of ways kind of bucks that.
Yeah.
And this is really early on in like the slasher craze. This is 1980, right? We've talked about this before. 81 is the peak of the slasher. Like more slasher movies are released in 1981 than ever before. So so this is still as like the slasher genre is getting established. And this movie is, I don't think in any way a slasher, but I think people expect it to be a slasher because it's John Carpenter and it's her. And they know that there's like ghost pirates and they have swords.
Yeah.
So you expect this to be a slasher. You expect her to be a final girl, but it really is an ensemble cast. And the ensemble drives this thing. So I hadn't even considered that because it's been so long since I saw this movie for the first time where I do remember being let down in that way when I first saw this movie. I was like, man, I expected her to be Laurie Strode. And when she wasn't, and when this movie wasn't a slasher in the first place, I was like, well, what the fuck was this thing?
Yeah. So, speaking of people who fall firmly into this horror genre as we keep looking at them, I'm going to go to Tom Atkins, man.
Mm-hmm.
Tom Atkins is that dude. Like he's just one of those guys where it's like you see him and you're going to get a solid performance. The movie may be great. It may be something that you love. It may not be something wonderful, but you always know you're going to get a good performance out of Tom Atkins. And he's had a good run in horror. He was in Halloween 3, Season of the Witch, Night of the Creeps.
I love Night of the Creeps.
So good. And so he's done a ton of these things, and in this movie he was exactly perfectly cast.
Yeah.
And then turned around and acted out this role amazingly. Just a no bullshit kind of guy. He likes driving his truck. He likes drinking beers, likes fishing with his buddy. He's concerned because he knows his buddy well enough to know he should be home. He starts this whole ball rolling on figuring all this stuff out, and he's not going to stop until he knows what's going on. At the end, he ends up temporarily saving Father Malone. He did everything he had to do. There's not a lot of depth to Tom Atkins in this role, right? Like Nick is just a dude. We don't know anything about him. Like I said, he likes Budweiser. He likes fishing. He cares about this town, but I didn't need to know anything else about him. That's what's amazing about what Tom Atkins brought to this character is the fact that he was so Nick in his portrayal of Nick that it didn't bother me that he was just absolutely just a tropey, stereotypical man's man. But the way that he did it was so great. Yeah, like, no, I don't need to know anything about him. Like, I honestly, I don't know if they ever said what his last name was in the movie, but I don't care because what he gave me everything I needed to know. Then none of it needed to be spoon fed. I didn't need them sitting there cuddling and get some story about why he's, still single at this age, living in this small town. I didn't need all that. I needed this guy to be like, oh yeah, let's let's get on a boat. I got a buddy that owes me a favor. Oh shit, there's my friend, like my friend's boat. I'll call the Coast Guard. He was that guy that always knew what the next thing to do was, and he became the main cog in driving this thing forward. Every time there was something new that happened in this movie, Nick was the catalyst for it. And so even though we don't know anything about Nick, he was still a perfect character in this movie.
I think that these are the 4 characters that I hoped we would talk about, by the way. I think that there's 2 different approaches when it comes to writing characters for movies. One is that you are writing an entire person with an incredible backstory. Like, this is a person who has lived an entire life and who has an entire life left to live after the movie. And it takes a very special kind of performance to pull that thing off. It also takes a very special kind of writer to pull that thing off. And then there's the total opposite of that, which is, this is not a person. Yes. They exist solely on celluloid. Yes. And outside of what you are seeing, this person doesn't exist.
Right.
So when it cuts to Adrian Barbeau, he ceases to exist entirely. And to pull that off, you need a very special kind of writer, and you need a very special kind of actor. And he is the guy to do that, where it's like, I don't know what the fuck this guy is doing when he's not on screen. I imagine that he exists somewhere in the backside of my television, just smoking a cigarette, waiting for his line. He's like, oh shit, I'm on. Let me put this shit out, and then jump to the front of the TV again. That's what he does, and he does it so perfectly, because that one moment comes to life.
Yeah. And
he does that so well, because you're right. Like, he is the perpetual man of action.
Yes.
Always. I made the comparison to Harrison Ford before. I think Harrison Ford has the potential to be a little deeper than Tom Atkins does. But Tom Atkins, man, like, when it's time to, like, no, that's not what he does, because that's not the kind of guy he is. I was on that boat just 2 days ago, and it looks like it's been underwater for a week. It's like, yes, it has. I believe you, because I don't know anything about your character. You could be, for all I know, just a pathological liar, and that is your job. But I don't believe that, because I also believe
may be a Navy SEAL. Like, we don't. We got nothing. But it was just,
he sells you.
Yes, everything, every line he delivered was with authority. The man, like, he was so sure in every single thing he did and said, and just, from starting off as just a good old boy in his old truck who drinks while he's driving home at night. It's like, well, what is it, midnight? Time for a beer while I drive home. Like, I live in Alabama. I work with and live with plenty of people like that, and he, from that to the guy who, has just intimate knowledge of what a person should, like what it's like when a person's underwater or when they've drowned, and and how long it takes for a boat to rust, and you're just going, I have no problem believing that you have all of this knowledge. I have no problem believing that you picked up a hot hitchhiker and banged her, like, without learning her name. Like, that, it doesn't bother me for a second to think that this character did that.
By the way, that's the last thing I would not believe. Out of all the things there, like, that's the one thing that for sure happened. There's no question there.
Yeah,
I don't know. There's something about Tom Atkins.
There really is, man. He's again, Escape from New York. He's in that as well. He and always just plays that same type of character where it's, he exists for 90 minutes. And even within that 90 minutes, there are times when you're right, where he's just smoking, waiting for his turn. And Tom Atkins does that.
Yeah. So I think there are more characters we can talk about, but we have to switch gears, because this is the month of the ghost. And so if we don't talk about ghosts, I think we're doing ourselves, you, the listener, John Carpenter, Captain Blake, we're doing them all a disservice.
Right.
So the ghosts here, we touched upon it a little bit. How do you feel the ghosts work in this movie? Do they work? Are you confused by how the ghosts work? Do you care?
I'm not confused by it, but it's because I don't care.
Okay,
Because
thank you.
because I feel like the way, again, right? If these ghosts exist when they're supposed to exist, and they are vengeful spirits that are out for they want their six because you took our six. And so, like I said at the top, they're corporeal because they can break windows. And not just like break them with their minds, which they can also
Right.
do, but they can also just punch through a stained glass window in a church. They're clever in the fact that they're knocking on the door, trying to get him to come to the door, trying to get Nick to come to the door. So they're they could have just busted into his house, but where's the fun in that, right? We're ghosts. Let's scare them a little bit. Why is anybody knocking on the door? It's 5 minutes, it's 12:55 a.m. So let's have some fun with it. I think that there was a genius decision made here in not only draping them in shadow a lot of the time, but also, I mean, they're obviously just dressed in all black. So when they are draped in shadow and they are wearing, or are all black, when you get this black on black, you get this really cool void effect. It's not as much that they blend in, it's as much as you get a weird, like, negative space vibe, kind of like when the Predator is invisible, and he's invisible, but you can still see him because there's something off about that space that he's in. So I loved all of that. The vengeful ghost is the most fun ghost, right? You got your Caspers, you've got your time loop ghosts that are just living the last 12 seconds of their traumatic life over and over again. You've got your warning ghosts. These are all the types of things that we're going to get into as the month goes on. But I love that we started with the vengeful ghost, the ghost that's not just around because it's stuck here, the ghost that's around because it sat waiting 100 years for its opportunity to come back. The willing ghost, the ghost that doesn't want to move on because fuck that town and fuck those people and what they did to us. The idea that you can be filled with enough rage and hate to keep your soul, your immortal presence on this material plane, that's the level of petty that so many people strive for, right? It's if you can be filled, that's the level of petty. I don't know if you're a hip hop guy, but it's been all over media, so I know that's the level of petty and hate that Kendrick Lamar has for Drake right now. Right?
Yes, and I'm totally here for it.
If Kendrick Lamar were to die tomorrow, then he would still be here, and somehow we'd still be getting tracks, and they would just show up on Spotify, and they wouldn't be coming from an IP address, because that level of intense hate that they had, and then but justifiable hate, right? It makes so much sense, and I love it.
From Blake or Kendrick? Justifiable hate from Blake or Kendrick.
Oh, honestly, neither one of them probably. From the ghosts in this, they have justifiable. The other two, I mean, look, I love a good rap beef, but it almost always boils down to just childish squabbling, like, so
100%.
They can be that petty, and I'm sure that outside of the realm of where these tracks exist, they may actually hate each other. For all I know, they're on the phone every night, like,
not.
Hey, let's do this. There's a lot of money to be made. But from these ghosts, the hate is justifiable, right? And so I love the idea of toying with, and I keep using the word corporeal, but it's just because it's just the best word I can.
No, it is. Yeah, it is.
I love the idea with toying with it, because yes, they can break these windows and knock on doors, but also there doesn't seem to be any physical rules about how they travel. If they're rolling in with this fog, where their ship docked, right? How some of them are at the lighthouse, and it still seems like there's 6 at the church simultaneously, even though, as far as we know, there's only supposed to be 6. So
Well, there were 6 that died. There was an entire leper colony.
there we go. That's right. So there we go. So, but I love the idea that they never needed to explain that to me. Like you said, does it make sense? I don't know. Do I care? Also, no. Right. Because what they gave me here, like if you're watching us, if you're watching this on YouTube or something right now, this picture behind us, it's so good.
Yeah.
They looked scary as shit. They looked very original for ghosts. They didn't look like any other ghost that I could think of right away, to the point that I had moments where I was like, wait, are they ghosts? Or are they possessing someone? Like, how are they doing these things? Did those questions get answered? No. But I didn't care. I loved the way that he toyed with one of the oldest concepts when it comes to scaring people, this idea that when you die, you stay here. And he took centuries of ghost lore, created something that was timeless, and then created an image that was uniquely the fog.
To me, the image is the thing that sticks with me most. I've mentioned this before, but I have a nice little collection of like action figures and collectibles and stuff like that. And in fact, my litmus test for whether I think there's something iconic in a movie is whether I want to buy the action figure for it or not. And this is one of those where the moment I heard that they were coming out with an action figure for Captain Blake, I was like, I need to have it. I have to have it. It is, in its own way, an iconic image, because I wouldn't call the fog iconic. It's right. It's not. I love this movie.
Yeah.
But it's not iconic. I think of the fog in much the same way that I think of Commando.
Surprise.
Yeah. Is Commando the best Schwarzenegger movie? No. I mean, come on, man. I mean, there's Terminator, there's Total Recall, there's Conan the Barbarian. Like, these are legitimate movies. But which one have I seen most? You bet your ass it's fucking Commando, right? And that's kind of what this movie is. Like, no, I haven't seen it more than Halloween, but I have seen it quite a bit. And this is a movie where, like, every now and then I want to watch this over Halloween, because there's a fun factor here that, like, Halloween is so dark. Halloween is so serious. And the ghosts have something to do with that. Like, I want to see these ghosts. There's something truly sinister about them. And yet I never once, not even as a kid, thought they're evil.
Right.
Like, for me, I understood as a kid. I'm like, no, this is justice. This is justice. Somebody fucked up. Not them, but somebody fucked up. And now someone is paying the price. And I love that this is, in almost every way, the most traditional representation of ghosts.
Yeah.
And in that own way, when you think of it, like, ghosts usually have some sort of like Edwardian or Victorian look to them. Like, they were usually wearing like breeches or some shit.
Yes.
Right. And it's like, okay, well, if the story starts in 1880 in a seafaring town on the West Coast, what the fuck would a ghost look like? And it would look like a fucking pirate. And that's exactly what these guys look like. So, yeah, for the first time ever, way before Pirates of the Caribbean, Gore Vidal has everything to owe to this movie and its aesthetic.
Yep.
And wow, man, like, this look is absolutely iconic. So, like, the look, number one, 100%, this is what keeps me coming back to the movie. But also the way the ghosts function. And I think the fact that Carpenter never decides, I need to explain this. it helps because the ghosts are the fog, but the fog is the ghosts. How does that work? There's some sort of like transmutation going on there, and I don't give a fuck because we see the fog coming under doors, but the ghost won't come in.
Right.
But we know that they travel through the fog. Explanation? No. Do I care? Also no. Because it gives us those fantastic moments where we get that slow. It's not a normal knock.
Right.
It's the ghost knock. You know the knock. Everyone knows that knock. In fucking Japan, they know that knock.
Yep.
All right. In Australia, they know that knock. It doesn't matter what hemisphere of the world you're in. You know that knock. It's like, nah, it's the ghost knock. I'm not fucking getting that one. Fuck you, ghost. Not today.
Not today.
And yet everyone in the movie goes for it because everyone in the movie is a fucking idiot. And I love that. I love movies where people are super intelligent, but then I love your Mrs. Cobritzes. I love characters like that, where it's like, now go to your room because I'm going to go answer this knock and there might be a bad man out there. We're like, don't fucking answer the door, Mrs. Cobritz, but no, go answer the door because I want to see you get your fucking comeuppance. You're fucking stupid. I love that. And I love that she gives the ghost an opportunity to be ghosts, to be vengeful, because spirits deserve to be vengeful, because sometimes you get fucked over. And when you get fucked over, you know what you want to do? You want to fuck those people over 10 times as much. And these ghosts are good because they're not fucking you over 10 times as much.
Right.
It's equal. It's 1-to-1.
They're going 1-to-1.
Yeah. You killed 6 of our people. We're going to kill 6 of yours. That's it. That's all it is. And I think that going forward in Ghost Month, I'm really going to be interested in how ghosts handle revenge, because I feel like that's central to ghost stories is revenge. And I'm thinking back, like every single ghost story we've ever done, it always comes back to that. It always comes back to revenge. And Blake is a vengeful looking dude. We only get like one real good glimpse of him, and I think that that's part of why this movie is so effective. Yes. We get like a maggoty neck, or we get like green goopy cheek, or we get like a mummified hand, and all of it works. It all works.
Yeah, I was like I said, the very first glimpse of him I got, I was like, okay, that's where we're going with the ghost. All right, cool. I need to see some more. And then the more I got, the more I was like, yes, okay. Yes. And then, you get that moment when he grabs the cross, and you get that one moment of detail, and it all plays so perfectly. It's like, oh, well, it's been he's been in the bay for 100 years. Like this, it makes sense for him to look like this, and I'm good with it. So I think
my eyes glow red if I get one night of bad sleep. Imagine 100 nights of plotting your revenge.
Right. Like 3,600 or no 36,500 nights. Right. So I mean, I'm in agreement here. I mean, they're spectacular. The ghosts here are fantastic. So that leaves us with just one thing. It's time for us to rate this. So, as we like to remind you at this point in every episode, we don't believe that a movie should be compared to other movies when it comes to deciding how good it is. We've referenced a lot of other movies, but what we're looking at here is just what John Carpenter gave us in The Fog. And so we don't use stars or popcorn buckets or any of those other things. We create a unique rating system for every movie. And so now we are doing The Fog. We are into Ghost Month. So, Dave, out of a possible 5 stolen riches.
Ooh, I like it.
What do you give The Fog?
Look, I want to give it 5, but it's not 5. It's not 5. Like in my heart of hearts, I'm like, no, this movie's awesome and I love it, but it's not perfect. And I don't think I can even go as high as 4.5. But I am gonna give it 4. What was it? Stolen Treasures?
Stolen Treasures.
Stolen Treasures. I am going to give it 4 Stolen Treasures because something that we didn't talk about at all in this is this movie's beautiful to look at.
Mm-hmm.
It is gorgeous. I texted a buddy of mine, like, I don't know, maybe 10 minutes into this movie, and upon rewatch, and since we started doing Shiver, I've started paying like closer attention to things like cinematography and lens choice and film stock and stuff like that. And I was just going on and on about how gorgeous this movie looks. The photography is amazing. It is a joy to watch. The score is just out of hand good. Like, is it as iconic as Halloween? No, but fucking nothing is as iconic as Halloween.
Correct.
But it's John Carpenter, man. And every performance is great. The ghosts are awesome. I can watch this movie with, if my 2-year-old wanted to watch this, I feel like it would be okay.
Right.
And I think that that's a rare occasion where anyone can sit down and watch this movie. I can put it on for my grandfather and I know he's not going to have a heart attack. I can put it on for my 10-year-old and I know that he's going to laugh his ass off. I can put it on for my school, right? For a class at work, and no parent is going to email me like, what the fuck are you doing putting this on for my kids?
Right.
So it's almost perfect in its own way, but the thing is that it's not perfect. So it's a 4 for me. I want to give it higher, but I there's just something in me. It's like, nah, I can't give it higher than 4.
Yeah, no, I'm right there with you. Right. It's for what it is. I always go back to when we did Evil Dead with Seth Key, and he said, 5 in my heart, like 3.5 or 4 on the table. Right. And that's how this sits. Yes. I loved this movie. I'm going to go back to it. I'm going to watch this movie. I think that you're right. I think that even though it's not a movie that takes place in October or around Halloween, I think that it's the perfect Halloween get-together movie. Because you can sit and you can bullshit. You're not going to miss any key plot points. Everybody can have a few drinks and still keep up. I think that and you're right. And I don't think I have to be like, oh, well, we were going to watch this, but Susie's here. And, she's not really into somebody getting fucked with a crucifix. Right. So
fucking Susie. It's always Susie.
And so, you can throw this on regardless of who the audience is. Mm-hmm. I think that you're spot on with 4 out of 5 Stolen Riches. It's I wanna say it's perfect, but it ends and you're like, that was great. But it's not perfect. It's not perfect. Some of the performances for as much as we gushed about them, they can be a little stilted. The lack of story plays in here, or the lack of like connective pieces between the story, right? This movie kind of just goes from set piece to set piece. Little things like that, kind of chip away at whether or not you can consider it perfect. But will I rewatch this a lot in the future? Absolutely. So definitely going to go 4 out of 5 Stolen Riches on that.
Yeah, it has all the makings of a cult classic. And I think that that's why it is considered a cult classic by a lot of people. And I also know that because of its shortcomings, that's why a lot of people can very easily overlook this thing. When they're thinking John Carpenter, they're like, okay, well, I mean, Assault on Precinct 13 is almost like a playbook for how to handle action thrillers.
Assault on Precinct 13 is a fucking masterclass.
It is. It's a masterclass in thriller, in action, in like low light photography. Like it's perfect in a lot of ways. And Halloween is that too, and then like you can kind of like go forward a little bit and it's like, okay, Village of the Damned, that's how you do a remake.
Right.
There's a lot of instances there where it's like John Carpenter. Yeah, that was great. And a lot of people have seen those things. I don't feel like people talk about The Fog a lot. And I understand why, but also like get off your fucking high horse.
Right.
How many of these fucking, Friday the 13th, and I've said it myself, Friday the 13th is my favorite horror franchise. How many of these Friday the 13th movies have you rewatched like a gazillion times?
Yeah.
Fucking watch The Fog. Just
You're
watch The
wrong.
Fog. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there it is. A solid and unanimous 4 out of 5 Stolen Treasures, Stolen Riches on The Fog from 1980, which there's a remake of from the early 2000s, and I knew about, but also have not seen that. So
it's actually not bad.
Okay, good to know. So make sure you've head over to shiverpod.com where you can find links to all of our social media websites. We are on Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter. I think that's all of them, right? Of course, and StreamYard hosting this every week where you can catch us live at 9/8 Central. We are in the month of the ghost. And next week, we're going to go back to what is becoming familiar waters of South Korea as we do a movie that I think a year and a half ago when we were on Dads from the Crypt. Or no, it wasn't on Dads from the Crypt. It was just like an end of year episode or something. And it was like, what do we hope we do in the future? I brought this movie up. And it is Tale of Two Sisters. And so very different type of ghost in that, as the Asians tend to do. They have you know, their own interpretations of things. And so we're going to go to a very different end of the spectrum with what a ghost is like with Tale of Two Sisters next week. And we're going to do a lot of reading because the movie's in Korean. So very excited to bring you that one next week. Thank you to everybody who's listening. We appreciate all of you. Offer still stands. I actually got a great deal from Sticker Mule the other day and ordered a bunch of new stickers. If you would like to show your love for the Shiver podcast out there in the world, wherever you are, I know we've got at least one listener all the way out in California. Greg, how are you? Hit the DMs, give me your address. I'll drop you a couple stickers in an envelope. I've reached the point in my life where I'm literally like just branding like everything that I have.
As well, you should be.
So I would love it if you did too. We'll feature you on our Instagram for having that sticker out there. We appreciate all of you guys listening.
Absolutely. So on behalf of all of us here at Shiver, fright you very